September 6, 1970, South Lake Tahoe, California. 25-year-old nurse Donna Lass is nearing the end of her shift at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino when she vanishes without explanation. Donna's car is found parked outside her apartment complex, and her landlord and boss soon receive phone calls from an unidentified man who claims that Donna will be absent for a while because of a family emergency. However, this claim turns out to be false, and Donna is never seen again. Months later, a reporter receives a postcard from the infamous Zodiac Killer, who implies that Donna Lass was one of his victims. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Minisode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and we are continuing our Halloween-themed cases for October. For the past few years, it's become an annual tradition for me to publish creepy Halloween-themed articles at crack.com, so for the entire month, all of The Trail Went Cold's episodes and minisodes will be analyzing cases which I have covered in those articles. Today's mystery was featured in my very popular Cracked article, The 6 Creepiest Unexplained Phone Calls, which was published in October of 2014. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you've heard of the Zodiac Killer, as his identity continues to remain one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of all time. Well, today, I'm going to be looking at a missing persons case which, on its own, might not have garnered a lot of attention, but it's attained some notoriety because of the possibility that the Zodiac Killer was involved. But before we get started, just a brief reminder that The Trail Went Cold is now a weekly podcast which alternates between our regular full-length episodes and 10 to 15-minute minisodes like this one, which cover smaller-scale cold cases which don't have as much material to explore. So our routine is to deliver either a new full-length episode or a new minisode every Wednesday. We're currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, so if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it. The Trail Went Cold now has its own PayPal account and a new donate button on the website. If there's anyone out there who's feeling generous and wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we will be sure to give you a shout-out on a future episode. We've actually received quite a few donations these past weeks, and I'm just catching up with acknowledging them all now. So a big thank you to Mark, John, Abby, and Shara, who have recently donated to the podcast. We are so grateful for your generosity, and thank you very much. So with all this business out of the way, let's get this minisode started. Our story begins in 1970 in South Lake Tahoe, California, and our central figure is 25-year-old Donna Lass. She lives in the adjacent town of State Line, Nevada, which, like its name suggests, is located on the Nevada-California state line, but she works in South Lake Tahoe at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino as a first-aid emergency nurse. On the evening of September 5th, Donna shows up at the hotel at 6 p.m. to work her shift, which is scheduled to end at 2 a.m. the following morning. However, at some point during the night, Donna just disappears without explanation. It's apparent that Donna did at least work the majority of her shift, as the last entry in her logbook took place at 1:45 a.m. But what's particularly strange is that the entry is unsigned and appears to be unfinished, as the sentence ends with the words "complains of" before the pen trails down the page. This would seem to imply that Donna was interrupted in the middle of writing. She also left behind some personal items at her station, including a dirty nurse's uniform and an opened letter. The case takes a very strange turn later that day when Donna's boss and her landlord both receive separate phone calls from an unidentified man who claims that she is going to be out of town for a while because she's dealing with a family emergency. Well, Donna's boss finds this suspicious, so he decides to call Donna's mother in South Dakota and learns that there is no family emergency. This causes serious concern for the Lass family, who immediately fly out to California to report her missing. Donna's car is found parked outside her apartment complex in State Line, but she is nowhere to be found, and all her personal belongings are still inside her apartment. The only things which appear to be missing are Donna's purse and the clothing she was wearing when she disappeared. Incredibly, even though Donna had originally moved from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe back in June, she didn't actually move into her apartment in State Line until the day before she went missing. So she technically never even got a chance to live there, since she had to go work her shift right after she moved in. It turns out that Donna's former roommate was supposed to meet her at the casino right after her shift and spend the night at Donna's new apartment, but when she couldn't find her, she just spent the night at a motel instead. There are no witnesses who can recall seeing Donna leave the casino or parking her vehicle at her apartment complex, and no one has any idea who this mysterious male caller could have been. The case would go cold for 6 months, until the unexpected intervention of one of the most infamous serial killers of all time. On March 22, 1971, Paul Avery, a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, received a bizarre postcard with a collage pasted on the back. It featured an advertisement for Forest Pines condominiums in Lake Tahoe, with an artist rendering of a small village of condos near a snow-covered wooded area. There were some cutout phrases from newspapers and magazines pasted across the ad, and these phrases included Sierra Club, Around in the Snow, Peek Through the Pines, Past Lake Tahoe areas, and Sought Victim 12. A hole was also punched over some pine trees located in the upper right corner of the ad. The postcard was postmarked Zodiac and featured the trademark circle cross symbol which he liked to attach to his correspondence. Now, if I were to do a podcast on the Zodiac Killer, it would probably take a dozen episodes to cover the entire case, but in case you're not that familiar with him, here's a brief synopsis. The Zodiac Killer terrorized Northern California throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, and attained his notoriety by sending taunting letters to the press, which often contained cryptograms, which supposedly held the key to his identity. Over the years, the Zodiac took credit for murdering about a few dozen victims, but there are only 4 incidents which can be conclusively tied to him. They would be the shooting deaths of a teenage couple named David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in December of 1968, the shooting death of Darlene Ferrin and the wounding of her friend Michael Mageau in July of 1969, the stabbing death of Cecilia Shepard and the wounding of her boyfriend Brian Hartnell in September of 1969, and the shooting death of a San Francisco taxi driver named Paul Stein in October of 1969. The Zodiac took credit for committing many more unsolved crimes in California during this time period, but those 7 victims are the only ones we know that can be definitively linked to him. The postcard Paul Avery received in March of 1971 was not the first correspondence he received from the Zodiac, as this sort of thing had been going on for a year and a half. By this point, the Zodiac had already taken credit for at least 17 victims, and this postcard seemed to imply that his 12th victim could be found somewhere in Lake Tahoe. Once this postcard was turned over to the authorities, they checked to see if any unsolved cases seemed to match this description, and that's when Donna Lass's disappearance popped up on the radar. The specific area pictured in the ad on the postcard turned out to be the Boise Cascade condominium complex in Incline Village, Nevada, which is located on the north shore of Lake Tahoe. The authorities conducted a search of this area, but came up empty. In fact, this postcard turned out to be the last correspondence sent by the Zodiac Killer for nearly 3 years. But in a chilling postscript, Donna Lass's sister would receive a Christmas card in 1974, which featured a picture of trees covered in snow and was signed, Best Wishes, Saint Donna, and Guardian of the Pines. Unfortunately, no trace of Donna Lass was ever found, and other than the postcard, no definitive evidence ever surfaced to tie her disappearance to the Zodiac Killer. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. So was Donna Lass one of the Zodiac's unclaimed victims? Well, believe it or not, there is actually one connection between Donna Lass and the Zodiac, though it's a very loose one. Before she moved to Lake Tahoe, Donna worked as a nurse at the Letterman Army Medical Center in the Presidio of San Francisco. In fact, she was working there in October of 1969 when the Zodiac murdered taxi driver Paul Stine only a few blocks away in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. So is it possible that the Zodiac might have frequented that medical center at some point, set his sights on Donna Lass, and decided to follow her to Lake Tahoe to murder her nearly 1 year later? Well, that sounds pretty far-fetched as it is, but the biggest issue is that this particular case just doesn't seem to fit the Zodiac's MO. A handwriting expert concluded that the writing on the postcard from March of 1971 did seem consistent with the Zodiac's other writings. But even if he really did write the postcard, that doesn't necessarily mean he had anything to do with Donna's disappearance. At the outset, at least, the Zodiac always mentioned specific details whenever he took credit for his crimes, which left little doubt that he was telling the truth and that he committed them. After the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac even went so far as to include bloody pieces of Stine's shirt with his letters as evidence that he killed him. But not only did Zodiac not provide any evidence that he was responsible for Donna Lass's disappearance, he didn't provide any details at all. He just sent in this cryptic postcard with a collage pasted on the back, which prompted the authorities to put two and two together and tie him to Donna Lass. And it certainly wasn't the Zodiac's MO to hide someone's body. He wanted his victims to be found so he could take credit for their murders. It's worth noting that the Zodiac had previously gone through a 5-month period of silence without any correspondence until he suddenly sent a letter to the Los Angeles Times on March 15, 1971, where he bragged about murdering 17-plus victims. 1 week later, Paul Avery received the postcard. On the surface, it's almost like the Zodiac became antsy about not being in the spotlight for a while, but he didn't want to go to the trouble of actually claiming another victim. So he just checked to see if there were any unsolved crimes from recent months, and then sent a cryptic message to imply that he was responsible. It's also interesting to note that the postcard arrived on the exact 1-year anniversary of another possible Zodiac incident. On March 22, 1970, a pregnant woman named Kathleen Johns and her 10-month-old daughter were abducted by a male motorist on Highway 132 near Modesto before she managed to escape from his vehicle with her child. John saw a composite sketch of the Zodiac and thought he resembled the man who abducted her, and Zodiac eventually sent in a letter taking credit for it. Now, even though there's nothing to officially connect Donna Lass to the Zodiac killer, there is one possible link between her and a potential Zodiac suspect. Harvey Hines, a police officer from Escalon, California, started investigating both cases, and he believes that the Zodiac was a man named Lawrence Kane, and that he was responsible for Donna's disappearance. Hines compiled a report listing many reasons for this theory. Kane had an extensive criminal history dating back to 1946 for such crimes as assault and battery, theft, and being a peeping Tom. In 1962, he suffered brain damage after he was in a car accident, which supposedly hindered his ability to control his need for self-gratification. During World War II, Kane served in the U.S. Naval Reserve and attended radio material school, which would have given him experience with working with coded messages. The sisters of one of the Zodiac's victims, Darlene Ferrin, they claimed that Darlene was being stalked by a man in the months prior to her murder, and they believe this man was Kane. At the time Paul Stine was murdered, Kane only lived a few blocks away in San Francisco. And in 1992, Kathleen Johns was shown some photo lineups, and she identified Kane as the man who abducted her and her child. It's also worth noting that Zodiac sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle on April 20th, 1970, which read, "My name is," followed by a coded message. If you arrange some of the letters in that message, they would spell the name Kane. Now, there's so much information about the Zodiac case all over the internet that it's hard to separate fact from fiction and definitively nail anyone down as a suspect. Just as an example, the credibility of the claims from Darlene Ferrin's sisters that she was being stalked by a mysterious stranger prior to her death, they've been called into question by some people. While there's certainly intriguing circumstantial evidence that Lawrence Kane might be the Zodiac, but there's no hard evidence. Some investigators have accused Harvey Hines of having tunnel vision and ignoring evidence which points away from Kane. Kane died in 2010, though opinions are mixed about whether or not he could have been the Zodiac. But here's an intriguing piece of information which connects Kane to the Donna Lass case. He actually moved from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe around the same time she did. In fact, Kane also happened to work in the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino selling real estate out of an office there. And his office was apparently located right down the hall from Donna Lass's workstation. It's up for debate whether she and Kane actually knew each other, but some of their co-workers have apparently claimed that they did. Given that the final entry in Donna's logbook was unfinished, the evidence seems to suggest that she was abducted directly from her nurse's station. I know that this would have taken place around 1:45 a.m., but still, you'd think it would be difficult to successfully abduct someone from inside a casino, since those places are known for having high security. However, if Lawrence Kane happened to work in the same building, he could possibly know the area well enough to sneak Donna outside without anyone noticing. The big complication seems to be that Donna's car was found parked in front of her apartment complex, but there might be a simple explanation for that. What if Donna never actually drove it to work to begin with? Her apartment was located only a quarter-mile away from the casino, and a drive would only take 3 minutes or so. During her first few months in Lake Tahoe, Donna lived with a couple at another residence which was also a short distance away from the casino, and she would generally walk to and from work since it only took her about 8 to 10 minutes. I think it's likely that Donna walked from her apartment to the casino on the night she disappeared, so her abductor never touched her vehicle. Now, since there's no evidence tying Kane to Donna's disappearance, I can't say for sure if he was responsible. But if Kane was, then I would think that would rule him out as being the Zodiac killer. Because I really don't believe the Zodiac was involved in this particular crime. Like I said earlier, the Zodiac always wanted his victims to be found, and for everyone to know he was responsible. But whoever made Donna Lass disappear took great steps to cover up their crime. I just do not see the Zodiac going to the trouble of phoning Donna's boss and her landlord to concoct a phony story about a family emergency. That sounds like someone who's trying to buy themselves some time in order to get rid of all the evidence. Since this male caller knew the phone numbers of Donna's boss and landlord, and possibly sent Donna's sister a taunting Christmas card 4 years later, this seems to suggest that he knew her personally, but it doesn't look like they were able to pin down a specific suspect. So I think that the postcard the San Francisco Chronicle received in 1971 was either sent by someone who was impersonating the Zodiac, or the Zodiac just felt like taking credit for someone else's crime. Strangely enough, on the Zodiac website, zodiackiller.com, someone wrote that a retired detective made a claim in 1999 that a former Zodiac investigator had admitted to him that he forged this postcard. But unfortunately, I cannot find any official source to confirm if that's true or not. If the Zodiac did send in the postcard and it had nothing to do with the crime, then unfortunately, he wound up doing some other psycho out there a huge favor. If Lawrence Kane or somebody else murdered Donna, then I'm sure they breathed a major sigh of relief once the Zodiac stuck his nose into things, because that ensured the investigation would be steered away from them, increasing their chances of getting away with it. So sadly, I believe that Donna Lass was likely murdered on the same night she disappeared, and that the Zodiac killer is nothing more than a giant red herring which has prevented her from receiving the justice she deserves. So that's about it for this minisode. I know this case is 46 years old now, but by chance, should you have any information about what happened to Donna Lass, or where her body might be, please contact the appropriate authorities. Hell, if you happen to know the true identity of the Zodiac killer, please share that with the authorities as well. Just don't say it's Ted Cruz, okay? And if you have your own theory about Donna Lass or the Zodiac, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. I want to thank all my loyal listeners and supporters out there, especially those from the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. A big thank you to McGill Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and is the managing editor of our website, The Back Row. And of course, a big shout out to Vince Nitro, who composes our creepy music score. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. And like I mentioned earlier, we also have a donate button on our website, so if you want to express your appreciation for all the hard work we put into this podcast, we'd be extremely grateful. You can also check out my true crime and mystery articles at crack.com and listverse.com, and there's plenty of other non-true crime content you can find right here at The Back Row. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for what I promise you will be an epic Halloween-themed episode of The Trail Went Cold.